this election is about Donald Trump. I mean, the actual existential issue is that Donald Trump cannot be president again. It's a little confusing. I find this internally. It's like, Trump is the issue. We got to just remind people it's terrible. We can't afford to. He cannot be elected again after January 6th and after everything else. If she can make people friendly to and comfortable with her and with Walz in a way the Trump side takes care of it by itself.
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. It's Monday, August 19th. The political world is headed back to Chicago, the host of more nominating conventions than any other city in America, most famously that conflagration of 1968. To discuss it, Bill Kristol, who is already middle-aged in 1968, editor-in-large of the Bulwark, co-author of Morning Shots newsletter. How you doing, Bill? I'm
doing fine. And just to retort in response to that cruel comment, I'm just going to point out that more famous than 1968 probably was 1860, the first Republican convention that nominated Abraham Lincoln. In 1932, the Democratic convention that nominated FDR. So two major, both on fourth ballot in one case, sixth in the other, I think. So both not things that did not have to happen, that happened and probably influenced history quite a lot.
And we might have that again this time. Well, before I want to do a deep dive on the convention, but before we get there, it's Monday. I was by the pool yesterday, so we need a little palate cleanser. You might have seen there was a cutesy video that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz put out where they joke about what kind of tacos he likes. He likes white guy tacos, and she didn't understand what that meant. Well, Ben Shapiro and Megyn Kelly and other right-wingers lost their mind over this little joke, and I just want to listen to a little bit of it.
By the way, not racist at all. When the black vice president and presidential candidate is talking about the lack of flavor palette for white people, because white people have no flavor palette. Apparently, white people hate spices. I mean, apparently, a white people taco is tuna and mayonnaise. That's because white people don't like spicy food at all, which is presumably why between the 15th and 17th centuries, multiple European countries fought a series of wars over the spice route and the spice trade, because they hate spices so darned much.
Tim Walz says that he makes white guy tacos, and Kamala says, what is that, mayonnaise and tuna? Like, that is anti-white racism.
That is anti-white racism.
Who was the first one, Tim?
That was Ben Shapiro and then Matt Walsh.
I like this difference between the two. Right? The pseudo-intellectualism of Ben Shapiro is so wonderful. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, I mean, how ludicrous can you get, right?
Yeah, the spice trade. In defense of white people, Ben Shapiro, acknowledges the imperialist efforts of white folks to travel the globe, co-opting spices from other parts of the world. It's I don't know how these guys wake up every morning to just get upset about this. Megyn Kelly attacked the Bulwark over this on Twitter, saying that Tim Walz is not a man's man, like Mona Charen wrote. A real man's man wouldn't make a self-deprecating joke about his palate.
I mean, what can you say, right?
What can you say? I mean, I've rendered Bill Kristol speechless on Monday
jokes
morning.
Like white, I mean, palate jokes are all out of the question. It's an awful lot of humor is going down the tubes here,
This is racism. This is racism. What anti-white racism. It is pernicious, and we're going to be seeing a lot of it in Chicago this week.
It was Harris's joke, right, in response to Walz?
Yeah, he was like, I like white guy tacos, and she's like, what is that? Like tuna?
Tuna and mayonnaise. I thought that was quite a good, as someone who hates mayonnaise, first of all, I think that was an excellent line. Just for me, there's excellent spicy tacos and then very bad tuna, fish, and mayonnaise. So I'm on I take it that was kind of Kamala's point, so I'm with her on that,
Same.
Though if white people want to like, if even non-white people want to like tuna, fish, and mayonnaise, it's really, what's great about being a liberal these days is it's a free country. If people can like whatever they want.
Yeah. Well, brown people can like tuna and mayonnaise if they want. I hear some of them do. I don't know. Yeah. It's to each their own. But you got to get mad about something when nothing's going your way campaign wise. And that's been the case for the, Ben Shapiro crowd over the past month or so. Let's do that. Let's start with the polls first, then we'll get into the DNC. We had over the weekend, New York Times did a Sunbelt poll that had Harris +5 in Arizona, +2 in North Carolina, -1 in Nevada, and then -4 in Georgia. Semaphore out this morning with a whole battery of swing state polls. Harris +7 in Michigan, +6 in Wisconsin, +6 in Nevada. So Nevada kind of all over the map there. +1 in North Carolina and PA, -1 in Arizona, -4 in Georgia. So the main consistency there is Georgia is Trump's best state. The Southwest states a little bit noisy, with Harris doing better in the upper Midwest and kind of surprisingly well in North Carolina. How do you take the state of play this morning?
Yeah, I think, these, especially state level polls, especially Nevada, which is a very hard state to poll, a lot of transients and stuff. The culinary workers aren't sitting around answering their cell phones. They kind of work hard, and they're, on strange hours in casinos, and probably a little hard to get in touch with. So I think you got, there are, if you average the polls, she's, what do you think, a little bit ahead, I would say, honestly. Election today, she probably pulls it out with the Midwestern states, at least 2 of the 3, and 1 or 2 South states. I mean, but close. I mean, 60-40, not 80-20, maybe 55-45, actually, in her favor, if you add it all up. Kind of consistent with what I think we said last week, that Biden was down about 3 nationally. She's now up about 3 nationally. That translates to up 1 or 2 in most of these swing states. And that's kind of where the race is. So it remains close. She's ahead. And that's why the convention either increases that lead or doesn't. And that's why I think it's actually a little more important than your typical convention.
Yeah, it's a tipping point in both these. So if you looked at the New York Times, it'd be North Carolina +2, and semaphore would be North Carolina and Pennsylvania +1. So, it's not a landslide, not the landslide we'd be hoping for. It's still close in both of those, but a complete flip. I do think the North Carolina thing is interesting, because it had been dismissed basically. We had Nate Silver on a week and a half ago, and he said he thought that it was being underestimated as a sleeper. And the Democrats did better in North Carolina than Georgia and Arizona in 2008. In 12, definitely better than Georgia in 16, maybe Arizona. It's not crazy to think that a state that over-indexes a little more on college-educated white suburban voters because of the Research Triangle in Charlotte might end up doing a little bit better than people might have anticipated going into.
No, I'll say in my defense that I was on a conversation with Elaine Kmark, who knows this stuff very well, Democratic operative and strategist and commentator. And in March, Biden was just clinched the nomination. Different era, right? And we actually discussing just the numbers. And I said at the time, and we both said, North Carolina shouldn't be considered that different from Georgia and Arizona. Biden lost North Carolina by 80,000 votes last time. He won those other 2 states by 10,000. He won Michigan by like 140,000, right? I mean, everyone understands Michigan's a swing state, but the margin there was actually greater than the margin in North Carolina. And as you say, it's been trending in that direction in any case. So I've always thought it's sort of should be considered more like Georgia and Arizona than not. And they have that terrible Republican gubernatorial candidate, the lieutenant governor, who probably reminds North Carolina voters that, gee, this party's gone a little crazy, whereas, extreme MAGA, whereas actually in Georgia it's the opposite, right? Brian Kemp sort of reminds Republican suburban voters that, well, there's a sane Republican Party, and Kemp thinks Trump's okay, even though he's a jackass, so we should all vote for Trump. So, I think North Carolina is in play, and and so that expands the field a little bit, and that's been a frustrating state for the Democrats the last couple of cycles, but these states are all frustrating, and then you break through, right? So
that damn Cal Cunningham with those sex cost that Senate seat. That was a history breaking sext. Somebody that's pro sex message, you should do whatever you want out there. Not if you are in the tipping point state for the Senate. You're running for Senate.
I forgot about that. Yeah,
Cal Cunningham. That definitely cost the Democrats. All right, let's look ahead to the DNC. I kind of look at this week as like the end of the beginning of the Harris campaign a bit. It's like capstone to a month-long sprint where they've been able to control the narrative completely, almost. Shocking how well it's gone, and now they get to have this 4-day set piece. Talk about. I assume that we're just going to see much of the same of what we've seen the last 3 weeks. But what are you looking out for?
Yeah, so I agree with that. Though I would say it's also the bridge to the 3-week stretch, which culminates in the September 10th debate, assuming that happens, which it looks like it will. So if you think about it as a kind of one big thing, she's had a very good 4 weeks. Got from, let's just say, -3 to +3-ish with momentum, with no drama particularly, no maybe some demonstrations in Chicago, but basically a pretty smooth field ahead, it looks like, for this convention. And so I do think it would really help her to come out of it. This is just to say the obvious, but plus 6-ish to go into those 2 weeks before the debate, which will be huge. I'll come back to that in a minute, rather than plus 2-ish or 3-ish. I do think history suggests, and my experience personally suggests, the presidential speech is 80% of what matters at these conventions. There are 4 nights, but one night is different from the other 3 nights. And that night is Thursday night because it's the presidential, especially when it's someone who's not as well known like Harris. I mean, people have seen clips of her, but I bet a very small percentage of voters have ever seen her give a speech, which is certainly not true of Trump. I mean, the one reason the Republican convention didn't move things, even though we all analyzed it dutifully, that, well, it was pretty well done and this element was pretty good, but then Trump sort of screwed it up on the last night, is people all know about Trump. They weren't going to change their mind radically because there was some decent nominating speech by some, decent sort of second-tier speech by someone on Wednesday night, or even...
In fairness, it was a stabilizing thing. I think the analysis at the time, when Biden's still in the race, is that he didn't blow himself up. Right, which for Trump is always like a win. He gets graded on this curve, right? Like over the course of that 4 days, they were relatively static, and static was good enough for them then. But
it was, though. I think they blew in retrospect, and maybe at the time we said this too. The Vance nomination, which was Monday, another very different thing from this convention, which won't have the normal VP nomination drama, which is often the weekend before or the first day of, means that that's done. So what's the drama of this convention? It's just the Harris speech. But I think the Vance pick actually hurt more than I realized at the time. If you think back, he had the assassination attempt Saturday night. They set up a pretty good convention, really, in terms of some of the secondary acts. And then the Vance pick became a focus for the first 2 or 3 days and really, I think, hurt the momentum. And then Trump sort of was okay, but not great on Thursday night. And he came out of the whole thing before Biden pulled out. So let's just say on Saturday assassination attempt to the day before Biden pulled out. I don't have the impression Trump picked up much, maybe a point, but I mean, he could have done more, I think, though harder because everyone knows him already. Anyway, Harris, less well known. People haven't seen her give a full speech. There will be pretty big viewership, I should think, on Thursday night. And so I think it's a pretty big moment for her. All the other stuff, I think, secondary, President Obama, President Clinton, Secretary Clinton. I do think the Biden handoff, Frank Lavin has a good piece on this at the Bulwark this morning, is those things are tricky. Reagan did a good job of it with Bush in '88, but Reagan was also a very popular president, so it was easier. Biden is, I think, somewhat bitter about what happened. He's got to really shove that aside. And I think, let Harris take the baton. Don't look at all grudging. Don't look like you're giving her instructions as you hand it off to her. Just give her the baton tonight.
The Vance thing is just a good point. Just one thought on that very briefly is, you do just run a counterfactual of going back and you pick somebody, a non-entity like Burgum or whatever, or Tim Scott, and you do kind of carry that post-assassination attempt momentum. Who knows? And obviously then the race shakes up completely with Harris, but I think that they definitely cost themselves there. The Biden thing tonight is interesting. I mean, it's scripted, and we're not just gossip mongering. Like, reports indicate that Biden is a little bit bitter about what has happened. It still has some resentments, but I don't think it's towards Harris, right? Like there's been no indicates that it's towards her in any way. And their event that they had last week, I thought this is armchair relationship psychologizing, but like they looked like they had affection for each other. There's a whole gambit of White House reporters that would love to write the story about how he is upset at her, right? And we haven't seen any of that. So I assume that will be relatively clean tonight. The thing that worries me more is just I almost feel like it'll be a nice night for the people in the room. Like, it'll be a valedictory thing for Biden. For Democratic political obsessives, it will be a nice, memorable thing where people might get some goosebumps. But you're kind of chalking up night one, right? If the campaign is about how we're not going back, and we have Hillary and Joe Biden speaking tonight, and Joe Biden is like somewhat defending the record and all that, there's not a lot to be gained out of tonight. But that's okay. I mean, a lot of conventions have a night or two where there's nothing to be gained out of, and so I think that's kind of what we have happening tonight a little bit.
I think it's a slight risk if, again, I think this is pretty marginal, all these considerations, as you say, and there's no evidence of Biden personally feeling any resentful of Harris, except in the very broadest sense that he would like to have been president for another 4 years or have run for president again. Second night is Obama, who is a good speaker, obviously, but it's also the past. So I think it is a slightly past-heavy first 2 days for a convention of a campaign that's premised entirely on turning the page and looking forward and don't look back. Isn't that literally the slogan they were using at one point? Don't look
we're
back.
Not going back.
We're not going back. Not go back.
Yeah.
Not go back. Here's Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama to start off our convention. So that's okay as long as the pivot
starting
happens.
them off, and then we're not going back. We're going to go back. We're going back for 36 hours, and then we're not going back ever again. All right.
As long as that pivot happens, it's okay. And the other thing I'd say, it's a very democratic. It sounds stupid. Of course, it's a Democratic convention, but these are all Democratic presidents and candidates. I think Adam Kinzinger will speak maybe Thursday night, but I think getting some of the Republican or Republican-ish or nonpartisan types a little more featured, again, probably be the last two nights, will be helpful to kind of broaden the tent a little bit for the independents and never Trump Republican types who she's won over some of, but clearly from those poll numbers, there's a 2 or 3 or 4 more % to win there, who are important. It's hard to believe at this point there are any Democrats who are still resisting Harris, honestly. So if you think she's at +2 and +3 and needs to get to 5 or 6, those are probably the independents and Republican-ish types, right?
No, that's the Kemp Warnock voters. No, they don't have to do it. The Capitol Police. There's reports this morning. Our friend Gil Gunnell is going to speak, who was one of the Capitol Police officers. So, I think that there'll be some other folks in that vein. Dan Pfeiffer over Crooked Media is out this morning. Former Obama communications director. I thought his newsletter about the convention was interesting. He wrote, "For the first time in a long time, Kamala Harris has made politics more than about Donald Trump. This convention will be different from the version planned for Biden in 2024 or his 2016 and 2020 conventions. While we can never lose sight of the existential threat Trump poses to democracy, a convention that spends more time on Kamala Harris than Donald Trump is a welcome change and smart politics." A.B. Stoddard in the Bulwark this morning sort of was on the same wavelength of that, writing that this week will be gutting for Trump. He's about to face something he's never had in his 9 years. The Democrats' convention will cement that he's no longer the main character. So I think both of those are true to an extent, but the balance is interesting. How are you going to be looking for that? How much Kamala, Walz intro, and how much reminding people how insane Donald Trump is?
I think more Kamala Walz intro and development, and not just intro, but also a little bit of forward-looking policy in a broad sweep of things. A little bit of centrism, I hope, in terms of the policy on some issues, at least. No, we have to hold. I think this is the case where, as they say, you have to hold 2 different things in mind that are slightly in tension with one another. One is this election is about Donald Trump. I mean, the actual existential issue is that Donald Trump cannot be president again. Having said that, as a tactical and even strategic matter, I think it's the case that the key thing to accomplish is the continuing and finishing, as it were, the introduction of Kamala Harris and making her as favorable to as many voters as possible, as acceptable to voters who aren't quite going to be favorable as possible, to as many as possible. And she's the kind of unknown, undefined element of this. People have already made up their minds about Trump. It's a little confusing. I find this internally. It's like Trump is the issue. We got to just remind people it's terrible. We can't afford to. He cannot be elected again after January 6th and after everything else. And here's this latest outrage on the Medal of Honor winners. And I myself am busy writing about it in morning shots and tweeting about it. And then which is fine. I mean, I think that's what people like us can and should do, obviously. But I do think she's been very good, I think, so far in not obsessing about Trump and in understanding that it's really more, if she can make people friendly to and comfortable with her and with Walz in a way the Trump side takes care of it by itself, maybe. And also, as AB pointed out, he gets a little crazed and therefore makes it he will on his own remind people why he shouldn't be president again, as long as people are okay with Kamala Harris as the alternative. Do you agree with that, or do you think?
I do, and maybe it's a job for Obama tomorrow. Is something I've been thinking of. I mean, he's very good at delivering a political attack, and he's good at multiple things when it comes to speechifying. That's his core competency. So maybe a job. I don't know. I mean, he's going to obviously have to talk about Kamala and talk about her strengths, but I maybe more value there with some one-liners.
That's really a good point.
Obama,
I think because
tomorrow night.
And he doesn't really, I mean, so not to get too pedantic, of course he can speak and can and should speak about Kamala. He doesn't know her that well. I mean, he can't really personally testify to her strengths the way Biden
they
could.
Didn't serve in the Senate together.
Yeah. And so in a way, it's more appropriate for him to say, look, I mean, not quite put it this way, but, in effect, I've been president. I know what it means. Here's what second term of Trump as president would mean. I mean, he can explain some of the Project 2025 stuff, some of the stuff that's a little bit of the weeds sometimes, but it also has more resonance than I expected. He can explain that in a pretty compelling way, I should think.
Yeah, maybe a job for Obama tomorrow. We'll be watching a ton of Bulwark coverage at the convention. We're not there, me and Bill aren't, but Sarah's there, Mark Caputo, Sam Stein, Joe Perticone, and so we'll have a bunch here on this podcast, also on our YouTube feed. Make sure to check that out all week. I'll be up in New York later this week doing late night on MSNBC. If you just haven't had enough of me and you just need the 1 a.m. Tim as well, then that'll be your opportunity. As you pointed out, Bill, Trump might just be doing the job for us as far as reminding people that he's crazy. He had a rally in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania this weekend. And, there are a million clips I could play from it. It was not a focused speech by any stretch of the imagination, but I think here was maybe the low water mark for Donald Trump. Let's listen to him talk about Kamala Harris's looks.
But she said one thing that got me. She said Kamala has one big advantage. She's a very beautiful woman. She's a beautiful woman. So I decided to go back and reread the clause. I'm not saying he's, but I say that I am much better looking than her. I think I'm much better. Much better. I'm a better looking person than Kamala. No, I couldn't believe it. She said, I had never heard that one. They said, no, her biggest advantage is that she's a beautiful woman. I'm going, I never thought of that. I'm better looking than she is. And
he's wrapped around the axle there about a Peggy Noonan column. That's who he's referencing there. I mean, can the gender gap get any wider? What the fuck?
I don't know. Maybe it doesn't appeal to I think men, I'm just going to speak for, I don't want to speak for every man. A lot of men think Kamala Harris is attractive, middle-aged woman.
More attractive?
Young,
so you're saying you find Kamala more attractive than Trump?
Than Donald J. Trump. I mean, I don't know, that's just, men could agree with women on that. I assume women believe that too. I mean, it shows how much she's gotten in his head, right? Don't you think? I mean, he just can't stand it. She's beating him. People like her more. Her favorable numbers are better. She's getting better press. And he just can't deal with it, apparently, right?
No, he's obsessed. I mean, I've suffered through every Trump public remark of since like the Walz pick, because I just wanted to kind of see for myself, because it's sometimes hard to tell. Trump will speak for 2 hours, and then you'll watch 2 40-second clips and you'll be like, oh, he's crazed. But then if you watch the 2 hours, you're like, oh, well, I mean, for Trump, actually, it wasn't. No, he's pissed. He is aggrieved. He's grumpy, and he's obsessed. Like, he's mentioned how pretty she is. And I think every public remark since the Time cover that came out, like, he's talked about how pretty, how the Time made her too pretty. And he's resentful, and he's upset that the people in his stories aren't complimenting him anymore, and they're talking about her instead. It goes back to the main character thing that AB wrote about this morning. It also you kind of referenced earlier the Medal of Honor recipient thing from last week that I think is also just worth mentioning again. We talked about it on Friday with Brian Beutler, and you wrote about it for the newsletter Friday. But like, as that ties to the convention stuff this week, I do think that is another area for contrast, right? Where Harris and Walz can kind of take the mantle of patriotism, being on the side of the troops, and he's really throwing them some softballs on this front.
Yeah, I think it's really set up for this Democratic convention to be the patriotic convention in a kind of healthy way, if I could put it that way, pro-U.S., but pro-diversity in the U.S., pro-military, but not pro the military of 80 years ago, but pro today's military. I mean, and pro the Medal of Honor winners, who incidentally are quite a diverse bunch. I looked a lot of them up Friday. I was curious morning when I was writing the morning shots. Anyway, but that's not the main thing about them. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good opportunity for the Democrats to regain some of that ground that they sort of did under Clinton and Obama, but not quite. Kerry tried, but never quite gotten back to being the if I can put it simply, the pro-American party, right? Jane Kirkpatrick did a lot of damage to them in 1984. Blame America first. It's utterly clear that the Republicans under Trump are now the Blame America First party. I mean, that's literally what Trump does for much of his speeches. And didn't he say something also? You follow this stuff more closely. he really loves. He thinks it's a beautiful phrase to say that America is a failing nation or something like that.
I missed the word, whether that was the word beautiful was in there,
but something. It was a wonderful. He really he embraced that. He's proud of having, as he thinks, thought up the notion that this is a failed country or something like that. Yeah. And I mean, of course, there's a big wrong track number, so it's not crazy to think politically you're better off being on the side of things aren't going well than they are going well. But it's one thing to be on the side of things aren't going well or as well as they could be going. It's something to say that America is a failed country, and that is their position. And I think Harris and Walz should and will embrace the other side of that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you saw a little bit of this, like at the earlier Trump conventions, was Khizr Khan's speech, for example. Right. You remember from the Democratic convention about how Trump sacrificed nothing and no one, and I just it's on a tee for them to hit it this week, and I think that Trump did himself like some good actually, over just by lying about the John Kelly thing and saying that he never said the suckers and losers remark, and then got away with that at the debate, because of Biden's inability to parry him, and then to go out and essentially say the same thing, right, to Miriam Adelson, saying that, your medal is actually better than theirs because you're not a sucker and loser like them with injuries. I just think re-ups all of that whole bag of worms for him in a way that I think that the Democrats hopefully should be able to take advantage of.
It should. I mean, he deserves all the criticism in the world for that. And it's so appalling. Miriam, I mean, the Medal of Freedom is a fine thing. My father, as I wrote in the Morning Shots, my father received one, was honored to in 2002, and it was wonderful to be there. And he was there with other Mr. Rogers got one, and Hank Aaron, whom both my father and I were kind of thrilled to meet, actually. And so there was a nice group of people.
Irving, Hank, and Fred.
And others too were there, obviously. But so that's fine. It's a nice thing, and the Medal, I have no problem with it. John Kennedy invented that Medal of Freedom in '63 to kind of give so the president could give civilians an award too. But the idea that it's in any way comparable to the Medal of Honor is so jaw-dropping and appalling. And so deeply revealing that Trump said it, and deeply revealing that he's got his own people are defending it. I saw your friend Corey Lewandowski was saying, well, the civilians deserve medals too, not just the military. It's like, really?
He wants a medal for the stab victims that he claims that he, the people that he claims that he killed in a stabbing while he was flirting with the married woman at the addiction awareness fundraiser. Okay, we're gonna get to Michael Weiss with some serious business about Ukraine next, but I have to. It's Monday, so we need to give people a little bit of humor on the way out before we get to Michael. If you want a sense for just how bad Donald Trump is unraveling and where his head is at about the state of the race, here is a song that he posted on Ron Filipkowski has been monitoring his Truth Social feed over the past day. He's posted about 30 times on Truth Social. He compared himself to Lincoln. He posted AI pics of people that are Taylor Swift fans saying that they're for Trump. That's fake. But this video is the one that really caught my eye the most. Let's just take a quick listen.
Fake on election day.
Fake ballots.
No matter who votes.
Voting doesn't matter.
Counts on the tape.
Just going to give it to Kamala. Very presidential there. Blowjob jokes and talking about how votes aren't going to matter. That's what the Republican nominee for president was posting on social media over the weekend. Bill? Is that reminiscent of anything that George H.W. did when you were in there?
Yeah, right. It's like, what can one say? It's good that Ron Filipkowski monitors the Truth Social account there, but I don't know. Of course, we've said a million times, that's really unbelievable that they're doing this, and he keeps on doing it. I think he's a little more disturbed than he was, though, and he's a little older than he was. And Harris, especially the thing with Harris, he had the Biden race figured out in his head. Yes. And for quite a long time, you think. I mean, he figured he would dispatch DeSantis and stuff. So he figured he was running against Biden for 2 years. And he had that pretty well worked out. And I think Lasavita and Susie Walz had it pretty well worked out about how they had Trump on board of how they were going to do that. In that respect, I mean, anyone would be disrupted by looking up and discovering you have a different opponent in a presidential race, in mid-July, but to be fair. But I think in this case, the disruption is so much greater because of Trump, and he's old and he's not that adaptable. And then the psychology of losing to Kamala Harris. Yes. And that's really, let's hope that continues to really bother him.
And this is the lash out. The beginning of that video is about how Joe left. And so I think he's very sad to lose Joe. And now he's really struggling to deal with the Kamala thing. And in order to cope with it, to grapple with it, he needs to fall back on his old binkies of, well, it must be just women sleeping to the top and election thievery. It's the only thing that could explain my total faceplant over the last month. Apologies to our Gen X listeners for that Alanis Morissette parody. But I felt like if I had to listen to it, you had to listen to it. Bill Kristol, we'll be seeing you later this week with convention coverage. Enjoy the beach with your family. That's a beautiful beach backdrop you've got there. No books, no Hume, no Thucydides.
You think I should have brought a couple hundred? Like Michael, look at him. He's got all the books. So, I should have brought books out here to keep the brand. If I were Trump, I would have the fake book, spines, right? Lined up wherever I went. I should think about that in the future. But
you should think about that. Bill Kristol, thank you so much.
Tim,
up next, Michael Weiss with an update on Ukraine.